This is our first edition of the Leading Change Circular Economy Youth Roundtable series. And I've got some amazing, interesting guests for this first episode here. So we're going to start with some introductions. I'll ask you to share your name and your title. And also, can you speak about what your introduction to the concept of the circular economy was as well in that introduction? So we'll start with Sophia.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophia. I use she, her pronouns, and my Chinese name is Yang Ya Cheng. And I'm currently the founder and executive director of Threading Change. We are a youth-led ethical fashion not-for-profit organization that is on a mission to embed the 6 Fs, which stands for a feminist, fossil fuel-free fashion future. So really work from the lens of embedding climate justice, racial justice, and gender equity, specifically through the lens of decolonization. And our work is deeply rooted in also embedding circularity and intersectionality into the fashion industry, using the circular economy as a solution. My intro to the circular economy really came about ever since I was in university. I graduated from UBC Forestry, so there's a lot of best forest management practices, mass timber, with how buildings are sustainably made. But I would say that really this is the circular lens that also led into kind of the equity lens became very apparent to me when I went to the United Nations Climate Conference COP25 in December 2019. And it was then that I realized that all these conversations about the circular economy were mainly talked about by people in the global north, deeply rooted in Western science, when the concept of circular economy in of itself is actually from many different indigenous, from traditional ecological knowledge and also from various different POC communities. So that would lead me into being more interested in the work and seeing how this really led into a fashion and textile sustainability scene. So it's kind of my intro into the work. I would say I'm really at the nexus of both the environmental and also human rights dimension of fashion and the circular economy.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It's fascinating and excited to dig deeper into that. Taylor, how about you?
Yeah, so excited to be here. My name's Taylor. I'm a product associate at Earthos Inc. And my pronouns are she, her. So yeah, my introduction to circular economy goes back quite a few years actually to when I was studying in my undergrad. So I did my undergrad at McMaster University and I was studying chemical engineering and society. So that program is pretty unique in that it takes sort of a holistic lens at engineering to take a step back and say, why do we do engineering? And it's not just, to make a building or to make a product or something, but it's really for people and for the planet. And so in that really started to take a look at sustainable practices. And one of my professors, Dr. Greg Silverbrandt, had introduced us to circular economy. And to me as a chemical engineer, it was really intuitive at that time because everything's a mass balance and what goes in has to come out somewhere, and in the whole biosphere, everything kind of stays there. And so anything we make becomes waste or it becomes something else. And to me, it just made sense that in nature, there isn't really waste streams. Everything uses something, whether it's energy, whether it's products. And so to me, it just, it was super intuitive to start thinking about systems as not linear and think about them as circular. And so one of these great books that my professor Greg had recommended to me was Cradle to Cradle. And in that, one of my favorite examples of one of the first circular economic companies was Interface, a carpet company that took a look at, do we make carpet or do we make something that covers floors? And it was just that simple question of looking at the purpose behind why we do things and whether that's moving to product as a service or a reuse model, whatever system it's going to be. Compostables, for example, with Earthos, looking at more of an organic circular economy. No matter what the approach is, just looking at things as not just a, make it, it's done and it's wasted kind of idea. And so that was so heavily embedded into the work that I did in my undergrad. And then now moving forward, it's just, to me, the only way forward.
100% agree. Thank you for that. Dave.
Yep. So hi, my name's Dave. Use he, him pronouns. So I work for Recycling Alternative as their business development manager. So Recycling Alternative recently defined their social purpose as transforming our wasteful waste, which is something we're trying to incorporate not just internally, but externally to all of our larger corporate clients, where we provide recycling and waste management services, consulting services, and innovation and equipment to help them reduce their waste on site. So how I got introduced to the circular economy probably stems back to just being a kid and being out in nature, very similar to Taylor's narrative, but just seeing that connection and seeing the system. And it actually started with water. My undergrad degree was in freshwater ecology, and that's really where I was quite motivated. I loved the system around it. I loved the flow of water. I loved how it moved from the whole water cycle, from freshwater to evaporation to condensation to into the ocean and then into your house and back out into the world. I just really like that cycle. So I think that's really where it started, and it kind of ended up having to move away from it for different reasons. But that's definitely what got me interested in the circular economy, is just looking at the circular idea that what's happening in nature is that things just continually keep moving along. It has to go somewhere and it keeps moving here. And I think that's really beautiful because there just opens up these massive opportunities. And I think that's really what the circular economy brings. It brings massive opportunities to all walks of life and all walks of businesses and all walks of people to just start finding their niche and finding their opportunity. So that's how I've always viewed it. And that's what I like viewing about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. And Amanda.
Thanks, Bo. So yes, I'm currently working for Reeve Consulting, and we're a small firm based in Vancouver. We work in the field of sustainable procurement, so introducing sustainability values into how folks buy things, and generally specializing in the public sector. So working with universities, governments of all levels, crown corporations who have very strict procurement practices and need a little bit of support in how they can align, their sustainability strategies and their procurement and buying practices. So we work across environmental, social, ethical, indigenous pillars of sustainability. Circular economy, we've definitely seen rising of the ranks in importance, and just waste management in general, and the links to climate and to social equity and diversity. So circular economy is a very interesting aspect to look at through a procurement lens and buying power, especially government buying power. So that's what I'm doing currently. My introduction to circular economy, I think, was back in my undergrad. I was doing environment and resource studies at Waterloo, which was a fairly broad environmental studies program. But I remember going to a conference, and I can't remember which conference it was, but I think that was where I originally learned about the concept of circular economy. And just like Taylor said, it really clicked that this is mirroring natural systems, and why are we not doing this right now, and how can we move to a circular system, immediately, essentially. And I think just the more and more I learned, the more and more I liked it, and found the intersections to the social side of sustainability as well. And moved into my master's, where I focused more on the business side of sustainability. And I just really found that circular economy has more tangible recommendations than just sustainability or sustainable development. I feel like there's a more tangible definition and business models that you can actually look at, and inner loop versus outer loop. And there's just so much to dig into there for organizations and individuals. So I've really, loved working in the circular economy space.
Brilliant. Thank you, all of you, for your introductions. I found that oftentimes when I ask people about this, there's always the sort of parallel with biology, and how we recognize that this kind of circular economic principle exists in nature. And so, love to hear that. So next question, I think we'll go in the same order as well. And it's, what does an average day or week look like for you? And so, Sophia, please go ahead.
That's a good question. I would say every day or week is different, but always rooted in change making and working across with many different stakeholders and partners. For us, social media is definitely an important asset, working in fashion and circular economy. So is usually, we have a program called our Global Innovation Story Map, where our Story Map team is interviewing different brands across the world. Right now we have about 40 brands featured from over 10 countries that are really leading the way in terms of circular fashion and a circular economy, and also equity and justice. And from interviewing them, sharing their stories, a part of our membership network. So we're helping to connect these different organizations and brands to each other, to also learn their stories and how we can better connect them to different investment opportunities, from all the speaking engagements and conferences that we go to. So our work every week has a lot to do with, communications, brand outreach, talking to people in different stakeholder groups. And then part of that stakeholder group is also youth. So our organization, everyone is pretty much under the age 28, with the exception of a few board members, really are youth driven, for youth and by youth. And I feel like this model really works for us because when it comes to circular fashion and also the circular economy, it's really young people that are really leading the way, leading the charge in terms of innovation. And it's a lot of us that are interested in exploring the possibilities and refusing to just be stagnant at where we are currently. So part of our work is also rooted in the policy mechanisms as well. Currently, we have two clients that we are doing consulting with. One of them is UBC Sustainability, and the other one is a UNEP, which is the United Nations Environment Program. We're helping to build out pretty much a youth global outlook and perspective on circular fashion. So from, liaison with these clients, there's client meetings, there's bookings, there's different content briefs that we create and we send them for overview. But there's also webinars that we plan on a pretty regular basis. They're called Textile Talks. Our previous season was really focused on, was called Closebusters, very much focused on, utilizing fashion as a lens of activism, but also understanding how a lot of what people tell you about fashion is a false narrative, such as over 95% of your clothing that you donate don't actually get resold. And our upcoming season is going to be all about fashion and climate, which we're very, very excited about. And a lot of that is also looking to the science-based targets and emission side of fashion. So in summary, it's a lot of things: content strategy, creation, consulting, webinar planning, client relations, writing. But it's very, very empowering work, and we're really lucky to be able to do this.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Definitely, as somebody who's not necessarily very fashion conscious, I've been so intrigued by your work and seeing what Threading Change is doing. Yeah, it's been super interesting. Taylor.
Yeah, so I want to echo Sophia's sentiment first, just to say, yeah, there is no real average day or average week, especially in such a small but mighty team at Earthos. And so as product associate, I do a lot of the product related tasks, but that's sort of taken on new meaning every month, every quarter. And so, day to day, what I'm typically doing is, overall designing better products and helping to make sure that we interface properly with business and R&D to make sure that we can actually build that out for our clients. But essentially what that means is looking at policy development. It's looking at, where we are today and where we're headed in 5 years. Are we designing something that fits in, or are we designing something that's future proof? And essentially, are we designing something that's actually sustainable? And so then that facet also comes into doing life cycle assessments or other ways of impact assessment. It's looking at, what do our materials look like? What does our supply chain look like? Doing that type of assessment, doing material and process optimization, trying to get it, as sustainable as possible, making sure we're reducing waste, what are our inputs looking like, doing that kind of stakeholder engagement that way. And then in that whole policy development and looking at, the future of compostable materials, it's looking at how can we fit in best and how can we be a real, true, sustainable solution. And that's not just from the environmental aspect, but how do we make sure that our materials are going to the right place at the end of their life? How do we make sure that our customers know exactly what they're getting when they get, their fork or whatever on the table? And so that kind of leads into the design aspect. That leads into, looking at what do clients want? What do customers use? What does the infrastructure look like in the places where we're servicing? So that's, dependent on different geographies. And so we also spend a lot of time attending conferences, doing meetings and things like that. We're on a bunch of committees to make sure that we're not just putting something out there that's going to be another problem product, but we're actually trying to make a difference in the best way that we can. And then aside from that, usually doing events like this, which I love doing, trying to stay updated and keep connected with a network of amazing people, because at least from my perspective, it's not just going to come from engineers or business development. It's going to come from people who come from all different industries. And that's where I get my inspiration from to do my work, to keep passionate about what I'm doing. And so a lot of what I do in my free time is attending things like this and keeping invested on all those committees. Bo, I think you're muted.
You think I'd learn how not to get caught on mute? Doing this like every week, basically. Anyway, Dave, throwing it to you, your average workday or average work week?
Yeah, definitely. Resonating the first two, Taylor and Sophia, super on the edge. So I work for Recycling Alternative, but Recycling Alternative has three other branches. So they have a fabrication arm, they have a waste lab, and they also have a technology and innovation side as well. So although I technically work just for Recycling Alternative, I kind of manage a number of the business development initiatives for the four companies, more or less. Now, the Recycling Alternative is the main company. That's our main bread and butter. That's where all of our corporate clients come from. So a lot of it's, managing accounts, managing their corporate accounts. It's a lot of emails, which is unfortunate, but there's lots of opportunities for impact and new initiatives, which is really what I'm most excited about and what I'm most excited for their growth trajectory, because where they're headed is really, really awesome. They're not just looking at being a regular waste hauler. They're not just looking at trying to go one step, they're trying to go 5 steps ahead. And I think that all goes back to their vision and their purpose of redefining their social purpose. Because over 30 years ago, that was when they started, and that was in Vancouver. That was before blue boxes were around, and going around collecting paper from office towers was a social purpose. That was good enough to find social purpose. But once they hit 30, they realized they needed to redefine that and do something more. So transforming our wasteful ways is really what we're trying to embed in, and really trying to look at the opportunities that exist primarily with our corporate clients, which are large property management companies and public corporations, which has more or less where we've had the most success. And I think that's what gets me excited, because that's the opportunity to really get in and make some impact in these larger organizations that have a number of branches, have a number of areas that don't traditionally necessarily have a strong sustainability team or strong sustainability values, but you're able to create a narrative that motivates them primarily through financial, but there's also operational efficiencies and other efficiencies that start hitting some other chords that start getting more of that impact they're looking for, and that starts driving towards their broader goals that they're trying to reach for. There's more and more governing bodies and governing organizations that have these labels that they're looking for, because they're being driven by the consumers that are wanting to participate or wanting to shop at their mall. So, okay, the consumers want me to be doing more. How can I show I do more? I got to get the certification. How do I get the certification? Well, I got to make changes. And although it's a roundabout way of making that impact, it's ultimately achieving that same goal. So that's what really gets me excited. And it's never really where I saw myself going, especially getting into undergrad. I really tried to stay away from business. I didn't think it was the right move for me. So it's been interesting kind of transitioning this way and seeing the impact that can be had, and getting to work for some really cool, really awesome people and innovators with Robert and Louise, who are our two co-founders, who really do a lot and are, really making a name for themselves, especially in Vancouver, and getting a lot of traction with all of their wild and wacky ideas. Like I mentioned, we're already at 4 companies, and they've got a couple more on the way. So there's lots of really neat things going on, and there's lots of cool opportunities with what's going on there. So yeah, it's all over the place. Definitely keeps me on my toes, but I like it, and it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I love leaning into some of that nuance around what it means to be a business in 2021, and how there's a huge opportunity for you to be a business, and then also use that to really create good in the world. So it's awesome to hear. Taylor, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Dave, actually, how do you navigate communicating value to your clients when you're trying to propose these new solutions in a way that avoids, just greenwashing or making it a checkbox?
Wow, that's a solid question. How to bring those values across? I think
because I love tips.
Yeah, it's been really helpful since we've gone through. So we've been working with the Social Purpose Institute, which is based in BC, and they have their program which helps you define your social purpose. It's a multi-year program. As you define it, you implement it, and then actually embed it in your practices. So it's been really helpful going through that program and having defined that social purpose, which has been a real foundational rock for me to implement and to start communicating. Because before it was a little hard. It's like, okay, what are we achieving? And it's been really helpful having that as a foundation. Now, in terms of implementing the values, I can't say that's the strongest lever I have. It ultimately just depends who I'm communicating with, because we work with these large organizations. You end up communicating with different levers and different people. So there are those sustainability people and those people in the operations that are really keen and want to hear about this, and that's what they're striving for. But ultimately, you got to kind of speak a more common language and just try to throw in your values and be like, okay, how is this helping you? And it's overall, it comes back to this idea of like thinking of a system. Well, okay, I'm trying to achieve this and you're trying to achieve that. Well, I know this is going to help you do better. And this is how it's going to impact your bottom line and impact your business. And ultimately, this is the story it also tells. And I think that's a really powerful component. I think, Sophia, you had brought it up, the idea of like the storytelling that you're bringing to the table. And I think that's what these larger organizations are really looking for these days, is like, okay, it's not just me making, a small change. How can I continue this story? Like, you're not really being a brand, but you are. Everyone's a brand at this stage of the game. Every business is a brand. So you're trying to weave in the fact like, okay, what are these multiple things that we can achieve by making a change? Let's get rid of bins here. Let's add bins there. Let's bring in this equipment. And what can you do with that equipment? Well, it does operational things. It can save you some money. It's great for sustainability. And like, here's the ongoing story you can continue to write and create. And we're here to help create that for you. And it's just a totally different lens than people have viewed waste for a long time. As you're probably familiar, Taylor, it's, the last thing people think about, it's your bin under the cupboard, it's the basement, it's in the dark, it's in the dungeons. And I think at this point, it's really coming to the light. People want to know more. People are like, where is this going? Where it goes in the blue bin. That's not recycling. Where does it go from there? Okay, it goes to the facility. Well, where does it go from there? There's so many steps that kind of go along that chain of custody with recycling, that I think it's now becoming more prominent. More people are open to the idea of trying to do something different, and that's what we're trying to do here. And those are the levers I try to push. I try to latch them in with what they speak to, and then try to expand them and go big. Like, let's go out there. Let's like try to like bring some storytelling into waste and make it exciting for other people.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. And thanks, Taylor. Amanda, what about your typical work day or typical work week?
Yes, for sure. So yeah, I just wanted to say quickly, Dave, I echo the sentiment of just the deep dive and how deep can you go, and what about this level, what about this level in supply chain. It's like, how far down the supply chain do we want to go, or or what level of criteria do we want to ask in a bid? And yeah, there's so many levels, from sort of light to dark green, we might say. Yeah, what do I do on a daily or weekly basis? A lot of client discussions, responding to emails, writing reports and presentations, some of those fun kind of business admin type tasks. But really what we're working on is helping organizations build out their sustainable procurement program. So we kind of have a framework that we operate under. To implement sustainable procurement, it needs to be supported across the organization. You need to have, a policy and action plan, tools and procedures, communications and training, measurement. I won't rattle off all 10 elements, but essentially we will work with clients who are at different levels on the maturity scale of where they're at, how long they've been working on sustainable procurement, and then helping them work on, one or more or several of those program elements to give the staff, procurement staff and sustainability staff, and then other, internal kind of units who are actually doing the purchasing, the tools, the knowledge, and the capacity and the confidence actually in implementing sustainable procurement, because a lot of folks just don't know how to do it, or implementing a new process into the procurement system can add a little bit more time and effort. So there's some resistance to change management there. But really it's just helping them, giving them the tools and the resources they need to operate on their own in their own program, so that we don't need to be around every time they want to buy something. Giving them the tools and the values so that they just know how to do it, kind of moving forward. I'm sure I can get more into that later, but I'll leave it there for now.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. So this question, I'm gonna just throw it out there, and if you got some thoughts on it, please jump in. What do you see as the largest barrier to making circular economy principles mainstream, and especially with regards to waste and supply chains, or the certain sectors that you're working in personally?
Yeah, I can dive in here. Ultimately, where I've seen this specifically in my work is that it's behavior. It's really hard to change ingrained behaviors into how we act, and then to try to rethink those behaviors and how they could be less linear and more circular. For example, a coffee cup. We've been given a reusable coffee cup as a marketing scheme for decades. People have cupboards full of them. They're cheap. There's amazing options out there that you can substitute and use a reusable mug, COVID aside. There's lots of options, and they've been available for a long time. It's been an incredibly tough area to get into and a behavior to change, because there's some ingrained behavior that we just need that cup. That cup has an impact. It tells a story. It's got the coloring. It shows what brand I commit to. And it's a really hard behavior to change. But there's, I don't know how many that are out there now, just in Vancouver, in Canada, that are reusable cups that are trying to break the mold and trying to get in there. I think there's lots of opportunities, don't get me wrong, because there's so much of that happening and there's lots of people that are really interested. But I think overall, it's a hard ingrained behavior that is just really hard to change without there being some kind of incentive. And it's just from my experience in my work, from what I've seen, it's one of those things that's very difficult. And like I said, we've had access to a coffee cup for a reusable coffee mug for a long time. And it's taken us a long time to try to make that change. So it's, yeah, I think it really comes down to ingrained behaviors, and it's a hard behavior to change. And it's difficult for us to think more circular when it comes to things like that.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Taylor, throwing it to you.
Yeah, so I kind of want to build off that too, Dave. I think I love the example of the coffee mug because it's something that seems so simple. It's like, just bring your mug with you. Or even now, there's a lot of amazing companies who are doing reuse programs. Like there's Muse Cup, which I know is in Toronto, that kind of takes that work out for you. It's already at the cafe. All you got to do is drop it off. But I think one of the biggest barriers, at least, from my perspective, is internalizing externalities, and that is just a general blanket statement, because I think so many of these conventional technologies and systems that we have right now have gotten away with so much because we've sort of closed our eyes to a lot of things that are going on. And so that's, things like, where does our waste go, or what happens when this thing leaves my hand, or where does all of this stuff come from? And so it's everything from, the supply chain that gets to you as a manufacturer or a converter for a product, let's say, all the way to the consumer, who maybe doesn't see what goes into that, doesn't see all of the, work, energy, emissions that went into that, and then the end of life, which they also don't see. And so the challenge is, for all stakeholders, for all people in all different industries, to take a look at those externalities as having some cost, whether it's a social cost, an actual like dollar amount cost, or rather putting a dollar amount to that. And so unfortunately, as we've talked about, a lot of the discussion of value communication comes down to a bottom line. But I think at the end of the day, with the circular economy, there is value added when you look at those externalities. And so it's things like putting a dollar amount on plastic waste, or putting a dollar amount on resource extraction. And so that's something that we haven't done, or something that we're just starting to implement. And I think as we start to do that, we start to see that, outside of just the inherent value for the environment, for people, for society, there is a business value. And as much as we want everyone to just, care for the sake of caring, I think that's going to be the push that we need to get us to implement better policies and to have everyone on board, no matter what their, inherent values are. So I think if I had to put it to one thing, it's just summarizing all of the challenges that we have to a dollar amount so that we can actually start to move forward on the same playing field.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Amanda, throw it to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll jump in. Yeah, a lot of the barriers that we encounter in our work is a little bit of a resistance to change, and also just new terminology and new concepts that you have to communicate and understand. Like, I think we all agree that, circular economy, to be successful in a business or in society, has to be implemented across all functions of the business for it to really work well. But a lot of those functions and businesses are not sustainability experts, and when they have to learn a new term or learn how it applies to them in their daily work, that can be challenging because it's new and it's unfamiliar. And it's not that they don't value the environment, it's just they've been doing the same thing for a while, and it takes time to understand new concepts and to really embed them so that they become habitual in what they're doing. And so a lot of our work, I find, is just connecting the sustainability group in an organization with the procurement group in an organization, who aren't historically groups who collaborate very much, and helping the procurement group understand, that they can be a strategic function within an organization, because to achieve most sustainability objectives, like reducing greenhouse gases or reducing waste, one way or another, that comes through what you buy. And so procurement professionals are such an interesting leverage point to incorporate sustainability in buying practices. So yeah, the barrier there is just educating them on what all of this means and how to evaluate suppliers who say they're doing good, but they're not. And giving them, the tools and the know-how to make it quick and easy, because a lot of this is quite nuanced and can take a lot of time. So making it easier is very important. And I feel like there was something else I was going to say, but I've forgotten it now. Maybe it'll come back to me. But yeah, I think the resistance to change and the education and just updating everyone on terminology. It feels simple to talk about it, but it really is still, we're still encountering it quite a lot.
Yeah, I find jargon can be such a barrier in a lot of different areas. And I don't know what the fix is. We still need words, but I don't know. Maybe somebody smarter than me can figure that one out. Sophia.
Yeah, so this is a great question. For myself, I think what is preventing circular economy from going mainstream is that the wrong things, or perhaps the wrong focus points, are going mainstream. And I say that based on experience. I remember I think it was maybe 2018, 2017, when a lot of restaurants in Vancouver banned plastic straws and they were all becoming compostable, and people were really inspired by that because it seemed like a low touch point, a low barrier to, really go to circular economy. And now, as we see in BC, there's more reusable containers, there's a plastic strategy, which are all really great things. But if any of you watch Seaspiracy, there's a quote in there that they said. I mean, I have opinions about that documentary as well, but this is one analogy they made that was really interesting to me, was that if you are only looking at saving plastic straws and having that as kind of your do good circular economy tactic of the day, of the month, of the year, that's the equivalent of thinking that if you just use reusable toothpicks, you're saving the Amazon rainforest, right? Like, the scale at how much we need to actually ratify and actualize a circular economy is not so much on just the material aspect, but on a cognitive shift on how we have to consume less as a society. So when people ask me, how can I be a better ethical, sustainable fashion consumer? How can I shop more sustainably? And I said, the most ethical thing you can do is really just by using what you already have. And that concept is so foreign to people because even in a terminology of circular economy, the term economy for some people makes you want to spend money, makes you want to buy things. And the other mainstream aspect about this that really needs to change, in my opinion, is we're still looking at, this is a romanticized view of, if I consume less, then I'll be happier. If I consume less, then I feel better about that. But we're still really letting products and consumerism dictate our choices when, fashion is one of the largest contributors to modern day slavery. Where are the human dimensions of this when we talk about sustainability? What about decolonization aspects? What about the fact that there's a specific reason why most of this cheap clothing is being produced in China, India, Bangladesh, and then later being thrown in Africa and countries such as Kenya and Ghana? There's a reason why these places are embedded in this structure, and it's because of colonialism. So unless we have open conversation about this, where the global north and Western countries are willing to acknowledge how they have furthered this deep inequity and injustice, and how we're providing better financing mechanisms to help global south countries reject all these clothing donations in a fashion sense, but in the garbage sense as well. Like when Philippines said no to all of Canada's garbage, we're not really going to be getting anywhere because inequity is so deeply entrenched in this topic area. And that's why I really admire a lot of the indigenous thought leaders and also people of color thought leaders in this space, because you see when they talk about circular economy, they don't even sometimes use that term. They've embedded these practices into their thinking, into the ways that they're, consulting and advocating for their communities for generations. And I think we have a lot to learn from them. So in talking about mainstream and circular economy, I think it's very important that we not only approach it from the open mind, but then, when thinking about different policy shifts and policy changes, whether it's like extended producer responsibility policy, seeing how we can have true textile recycling, seeing who we can bring to the table, how can we ensure that we're not being tokenistic on who we're inviting? It's like, oh, I'll invite an indigenous elder, and I did a good job that day. How is it actually having these communities be at the forefront and realizing that if you're going to be providing instruction manuals on recycling, you should probably have it in languages where most of the people in that community can understand, other than just English, right? So I think we have fallen short on the educational piece, but beyond that, it's also understanding who the unique actors are, and it's not just those working in sustainability, because it oftentimes can be a big echo chamber. And to really make it go mainstream is looking at it from the holistic systemic lens and just never refusing to back down, because we are really, really far deep in terms of overconsumption, and a cognitive shift needs to happen in society at every level of product.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and it brings something to mind to me, which is that, and it also came up earlier in this conversation, that there's still kind of not that transparency when it comes to what is happening to your waste, right? Dave, you mentioned this is the blue bin, this is not necessarily recycling, all of these kind of things, right? So people are sorting their waste, but they don't really know where it goes. So I'm curious, how can we encourage people, if it's encouraging people or if it's just a broader conversation, but how do we get that transparency to people so that they can actually understand the impact that they're having in terms of what they're purchasing, in terms of, sorting their own waste, all of these kind of decisions that people have to make on a personal level? I'm throwing that one out there as well.
I can go ahead, at least from my perspectives. So I think for us, we recognize that there's a few different levels in which we have to communicate, and those levels are very different with communication. And so first, that's the brands and the partners that we have. How do we communicate to them, what our product is? We do make resins, and so we do have to turn that into something eventually. But we kind of exist in that unique part in the value chain where we know that our product will get turned into something, but we're not direct consumer facing. And so trying to sort of make sure that that communication is really transparent. So we're not building something that ends up in the wrong system.
Sorry, Taylor, we're having a little bit of audio issues.
We sort of
there.
recognize that there are good systems for systems where it doesn't quite make sense.
Okay, hopefully Taylor will be able to rejoin us. Somebody else want to take off?
Okay, I'm here now. I'm not sure if it's stable at this point.
Yeah, that sounds much clearer.
Okay, we'll try again. Yeah, I was just saying that trying to communicate to brand owners sort of what that vision is, to make sure that the the products that we envision our materials going into and that life cycle of those products makes sense for compostables. And so, you know, whatever product that might be, that again, that makes sense for where that might end up. And so then at the consumer level, because we're not direct facing, it's a little bit more challenging to communicate that, but at the same time, we have to think about them and we have to think about that end product. And so what is the product labeling going to look like? What does the color look like, and how are folks going to interact with that? Does it look like a typical plastic? Does it look like something you would put in your blue bin, or does it look like something natural that you would, you know, immediately think to put in a compost? And so it's things like that that, you know, are more inherent to what the material is made out of, but at the same time, they are conscious design decisions that we have to make. And then at the end of the day, it's making sure that we are staying up to date on policy, but also just understanding the different jurisdictions in which we operate to make sure that we're not just putting materials out there that don't make sense for that region, or we're not putting materials out there in a region that doesn't have proper compostable infrastructure. So understanding at different levels how to communicate, but also how to bring that back into the design phase is so important for us.
Thank you, Taylor, and glad we got your audio issues sort of fixed
Yeah,
there.
sorry about that.
I can just jump in
No
very
worries, it happens.
briefly.
Yeah, Amanda.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just thinking about, you know, how can we encourage more transparency? It prompts me to think about the buying power that organizations have in their procurement practices. And I don't know if this is a full answer to the question, but I think something that can contribute to it. You know, every organization needs to buy things, whether private or public or even individuals, and just asking questions to the suppliers, to asking the suppliers to give you more information in their responses. Like right now, environmental questions are just more often than not being asked, or they're being asked in a very broad sense. And so you get very broad kind of greenwashy type answers back from suppliers who are bidding. But I think asking better and more specific questions up front in bid documents and RFX and tenders will signal to the market, to suppliers, that you're looking for that information. And so they'll have to go about finding that information for not only for you as a buyer, but for other folks, other businesses they're supplying to. And then they're in the practice of then having that information available and looking into their own transparency in their own supply chain. So I think encouraging folks who are making buying decisions to be asking more and better questions so that that ripples throughout the supply chain and that information is more free flowing.
Thank you, Amanda. And Dave.
So this is a very good question. I think it's a very tough one overall. I guess I'll go back to the origin of recycling. So recycling began, the Blue Box program began in Kitchener, Ontario in the 1980s, I believe. Really why they did that, they brought the Blue Box to the residents themselves, is because one, it increased access. Increased access because it was so convenient for them that this is great. All of these high value materials, which back then was a lot of just cardboard, paper, and metal, very little plastic, was high value. Businesses wanted to recover those materials better. It was more difficult for people to go to their facilities, their depots, so they wanted to recover them. So it made total economic sense for them to make that happen. Now what's happened since then is we've incorporated 1,000,001 different types of plastics and materials that are combined together that are just impossible to separate and segregate. I think Sophia was the one who brought this up earlier, is the pat on the back that people give themselves because they wish cycle, which is a very common term, which is just they put things in the Blue Box assuming it'll get recycled, and that makes them feel better for all the consuming they're doing because they're consuming to just be a functioning adult, that they feel like that's how they're functioning and in this economy that exists today, in the capitalist society that we have. And it's like, well, it's okay, this justifies all my purchasing because I'm able to put it in the Blue Box and now I've recycled. And as I mentioned before, that's not recycling, that's just sorting. You've put it in a Blue Box versus the garbage. So I think the transparency really comes down to, you're seeing this in California now. California is trying to push this forward, which is they're trying to remove that little recycling symbol, the triangle, on materials that aren't recyclable within the state of California. And they're trying to make that a mandatory claim for all new packaging moving into the system. So that's really the number one way to do that. Does that change everything? No, it still makes it confusing. What is recycling anymore anyways, right? So I think that's really where it stems from. It's just that we just got to be more upfront with the fact that our purchasing habits are wasteful and it's just garbage. I think that's probably the number one thing I get shocked at when I do educational sessions with our clients. It's just how much garbage they actually have. I'm like, this is garbage. This is not recycling. Stop putting it in here. You're ruining the program. And it's a hard, again, well-conditioned behavior we have that I need to be doing better. I need to be feeling better. How is this not the right solution? And I think that's a really hard thing for a lot of people to comprehend, but that's ultimately where we have to be moving towards.
Yeah, wow, that's like personal greenwashing. Sophia.
Yeah, so just kind of piggyback offing what Dave just said, which is a fantastic point about just comprehending how much waste there is. I think about it from the clothing sense. Say we all have probably 100 articles of clothing, right? Like if you count jackets, underwear, socks, shoes, and more. So think about how each of us has that with 1.8 billion people in the world and the population ever growing, probably more at this point. There's nothing more than that. And think about how much clothing is unproduced yet, how much is in the design phase, how much is in the landfill, how much are in the stores that are unsold, and how much are in thrift stores. So if you just think about from the clothing perspective, if we all got a glimpse of what Kataminto, the market in Ghana, was like with how much waste, and if we all got a glimpse of modern day slavery and people not getting enough food on the table but still have to be in this industry, would we really still consume as much? And that is kind of the question with transparency is you can encourage transparency in different ways, such as having there be more incentives for companies, and that's really trying to do with our story map is helping foster this notion of transparency, of vulnerability, right? That it's okay for businesses to fail. A lot of us fail many times, and it's to be transparent about where your stuff is going, the supply chain. Is that certification even legit, or just something you paid for? But then also this notion of like we can encourage transparency as much as we want, but then if that behavior change still isn't inspired, as many other people have mentioned previously, how can we ensure that this habitual lens of what we're trying to do does translate to if companies do offer more transparency? And something that a company who is really good at this, I think, is Patagonia. When they came out with their campaign a few years ago that was saying, it literally huge print on newspaper, just one picture of a coat that said, don't buy a new jacket, repair it, fix it, use what you already have, really get into share, reuse, and repair culture. And I think, a lot of communities, as I mentioned previously many times, there's lots of communities previously in other countries that always have this repair culture. But I think, especially in the Western world, it's become so easy to just buy new. And there's patents and there's licenses and their companies are purposely making the products lower quality, so encourage you to buy more and more and more. If we were transparent about how much we actually bought, if we looked into just how unsustainable they're making those products to encourage more purchasing decisions, it just might be that we can finally get past just treating circular economy as a habitual change, but then as a systemic and cognitive shift as well. So I definitely resonate with a lot of other folks have said previously. I think behavior is important, education is important, but also especially in the sense of like, how can you understand what businesses are doing and how can you kind of bypass that and think, well, I'm still gonna use what I already have because that is just, for me, the right thing to do.
So I'm looking at the future, looking at Canada. What excites you most about the possibilities of a robust and widespread circular economy?
Yeah, so Canada's actually a really interesting one. And I love that question with the context of Canada in mind, because I think we're in such a unique country, and maybe not the only country, but we're in such a unique position where we have, a country that has a bunch of different skill sets, different materials, resources, whether those are, I say resources, but we have access to a lot of material, skills, labor across the entire country. And we have a bunch of different provinces that have their own skill sets, that have their own things that they can contribute. And so we can have sort of micro circular economies within different municipalities. We can have that within provincial level. We can have that within federal level. And so I think it gives us a really unique opportunity to build these collaborations across an entire country where there is such a range in diversity of, people, backgrounds, skill sets, like I said, but also like the types of regions that we have in one single country. And so in that, I think we just have this chance to build really robust, I want to say like vertically integrated systems, I guess, where we have, it's not just one company that's doing this, but it's a bunch of different ones. And so I'm not going to get this entirely right, but there's a really good example in Guelph where Guelph has, I think it's Wellington Brewery, but they have a circular system where they have they're using waste from one product to make their fish and chips that they have. They're using waste to make the bread that they have. That's coming from the waste that they have from their beer that they make, and they serve all of that in one meal. And so, over one single meal, you can even talk about circular economy. And so that's just even combining, in one single community in Ontario, you have already a bunch of different people that can get on board with that. And I think, again, like if you took that and expanded the scope to all of Canada, I think we have so much opportunity to do so much more. And I think there's so much abundance in that. And I think getting rid of this idea of moving towards sustainable systems has to be about reducing and getting rid of and, net zero. I think those are all amazing concepts, but not everything in sustainability has to be about lowering, reducing, getting rid of, but it can be about so much abundance, and abundance in collaborations, abundance in growth, abundance in like a flourishing economy. And I think that's what excites me is I don't think that it's going to put us back in any of those things. I think we're going to have more jobs. I think we're going to have better, environmental practices. I think we're going to have better communities, and that's all going to come from collaboration. And I think just getting back to that sense of being, localized communities, but still on a more global or national scale.
Brilliant. And Sophia.
Yeah, I love this question, and I really resonate with what Taylor said. In my closing keynote at the World Economic Forum of day one, I said this quote, and it's basically like, Canada is such a diverse and multicultural country, and it would be a shame if our tactics of, tackling, upholding, and also actualizing the circular economy is not as diverse as we are. And I really do believe that in terms of our backgrounds, intergenerational connections, but also the fact that we are such a diverse country from coast to coast to coast. For me, what excites me the most about circular economy in Canada is that, as a not-for-profit founder and also sustainability youth leader, I can confidently say that from talking to people from all around the world, Canada is hands down one of the best countries to start a business, a social purpose organization, or a not-for-profit organization, because there is great support from the government in terms of grants, fundraising opportunities, sponsorship, and also business development opportunities. And I really do think that business development and also innovation is a key node of realizing the circular economy. So that's why I really love Dave's work, Amanda's work, and also Taylor's work, is that this level of innovation is so key and so vital, and it's important that we're giving young people, especially today, right now, the financing mechanisms and resources to bring these ideas to life. We cannot talk about a circular economy and talk about innovation, but they're using outdated technology from hundreds of years ago. An example of that is in terms of fashion. Some of the ways that the clothing is made and is produced from looms and from sewing machines is how they were making clothes back in the 19th centuries, so over 200 years ago, and yet we're still using those methods of just having textiles go to scrapping and not being fully used. So I think this idea of innovation is definitely super duper important. And then just to wrap, I think also from this lens of decolonization, we're in a very, very pivotal time in Canada right now where we are realizing and coming to terms with just how terrible our government and, the church and other people that came before us have treated Indigenous people for land and millennia. And I think it's very important that we are now have this motion of decolonization, truth and reconciliation, and also regeneration in these different solutions, because without Indigenous folks, without BIPOC communities, these solutions are not possible. It's really everybody on board, and it starts with admitting your faults and giving people incentives to participate. But more than that, having very robust consultation and involving everyone. And I think we're in a unique position to really dig in deep into that and make this work possible. And so I think innovation, grants, business solutions, and truth and reconciliation in summary, I think are what really excites me about circular economy in Canada.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Sophia. Dave, how about you?
Yeah, I think I take a little bit of a different lens to what makes me so excited about the opportunities here in Canada. This is kind of something I share in my own work and share in my own personal life. It's just the opportunities that we have with waste. I think we're the third top country in the whole world who waste the most per capita. So that's a lot of waste per person. I think it's hundreds of kilograms per person throughout the year or month. I can't remember now. Anyways, the statistic is staggering how much we waste, and it's incredible that we do that. But because we're at the top, that means we have the greatest opportunity. It's the low-hanging fruit thing you bring to the table, right? When you're a consultant and trying to make the easiest change, or whether an external or internal organization, you're trying to make change. Well, we're the worst, or we're near the worst. That means we have the greatest opportunity to make an impact. And I think what's really awesome, and Sophia brought this up already, is the fact that Canada is so large and we're so diverse from coast to coast. So there's lots of opportunities to be those niches. And going all the way back to why I was so interested in the circular economy in the first place is that biology component, which is just there's individual and micro niches, and trying to cater to those interests of the smaller community, the broader community, and then the massive community. And there's so many opportunities to fill in all those niches. And that's why you'll have 5 or 10 different companies in a large city like Toronto offering reusable cups, because there's opportunities to make that happen. And it's just going to make it easier and more convenient and more accessible for all those different people, whether they only like going in their 4-block radius in Toronto, or they like going to the GTA, or they're a globetrotter and they're going across Canada. Well, what's the easiest platform that's going to work for them? And that's what it's going to come down to, is that access piece. And I think that's really what is going to be really exciting, is that it's going to be more and more accessible. And hopefully that's it's accessible in a way that is approachable to all of Canada. And I think that's another component. I think a lot of circular economy initiatives just assume that people have access to things like additional wealth and opportunities to use their phone and the cellular data. That's not always the case, and it's not always the case for lots of northern communities. So I think there's lots of opportunities to then tap into that. Okay, well, now there's further opportunities to diversify and change your business model to fill those voids. So I think that's what's really exciting about Canada, because we're so diverse. There's so many opportunities to poach a similar idea, but just adapt it to your local ecosystem. And I think that's what's really exciting.
Great, thanks, Dave. And Amanda, how about you?
Yes, I mean, what can I add? I feel like everything that everyone has said is things that excite me. Taylor talking about the more localized industrial ecosystems that can take place, and the collaboration among businesses excites me. The opportunities that we can do with bringing in waste and diversity and inclusion into the economy excites me. And I think I'm going to draw upon something Sophia said earlier, which is it's the cognitive shift. It's going back to a more, traditional indigenous way of being, which is so much more in sync with nature. And I think the circular economy gives us a very conceptual, tangible, a shape, the circle to think about, that you can always draw back to when in whatever you're thinking about, whether it's the cycle of industrial materials, biological materials, even the human side. I think about a circle when I think about bringing everybody to the table, and diversity and inclusion and reconciliation. The circle for me is just such a tangible concept to be able to think about whatever facet of the circular economy, or circular society, maybe we should say, that you're thinking about. And so I think, it's the opportunities that it creates, and just that cognitive shift of thinking in a circular mindset that excites me the most.
100% agree. So we've come to our last question. Thank you all for joining so far. And as stellar young people working in this space, what is one piece of advice that you would give to a young person who is interested in learning more about the circular economy or wants to get more involved? Let's throw it back to you, Amanda.
Sure. Advice for a young person. Oh man, I mean, I feel like I'm still looking for that advice sometimes. But I think just getting it, I mean, this is so overstated, but getting involved in talking to people, I think learning as much as you can. And then, I mean, for me, this stands in like any kind of sustainability sector, circular economy especially, but find what your skills are and what excites you and match that up to what you can do. Don't worry about what you think you should be doing, or where the most money is or where the most opportunities are. Like, there's so many different things you can do. Just with the four of us on the line, we're in very different industries doing very different things day to day. So I would say just learn about like what you're good at and what excites you, find an opportunity that combines those things, and you'll be good to go. And talk to people.
Awesome. That's great advice. Taylor.
Yeah, I am fully in agreement with what Amanda said. I think as a young person, I think there's so much pressure to choose the right path or do the right thing, study the right thing, choose the right job. And I think that pressure kind of limits the opportunities that there are to participate in sustainability, circular economy, whatever word you want to give it, in making a difference. And so I think, to Amanda's point, just finding what you're passionate about and moving your life in that direction. One of my favorite quotes from Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield is decide in your heart of hearts what really excites and challenges you and start moving your life in that direction. And I've had that on my bulletin board since, first year undergrad up to now, because I think it's so important to choose something that you love and that you're passionate about and that gets you up every day, because that's what's going to drive you to keep pushing on that passion and what's going to drive you to make real change. And so I think for young people, take the pressure out of doing the right thing and just focus on what you love. And I think you can start to build a purpose and build a sustainable vision behind that. And that these problems are multifaceted. The challenges that we face with social justice and climate change and, a million other things that we're facing today, because they're so multifaceted, it means we need all hands on deck, and we need everyone from all different sectors, from all different walks of life, to be a participant in it. And so there's a space for everyone.
That's great. Thank you, Taylor. Dave.
Yeah, just to be slightly different from Amanda and Taylor, because that's definitely how I feel as well. I think for maybe an action item in people's personal lives, really building off this, is just starting where you're most interested in, whether it's with your own clothing purchases, whether it's your nighttime routine, your bathroom routine, or in the kitchen. That's ultimately where I started. That's where I'm most motivated personally, and that's kind of where I started my own journey, which is like, okay, let's try to buy better materials. Can I buy things in bulk? Can I buy things without packaging? Okay, now that I've done this, let's choose better materials to be cooking with. And then so it's just, I found that was a great way for me to really dive in and to take a deep dive and then grow from there. Like, okay, I've kind of done everything I want to do or can do here. Now I can move on to other aspects of my life and kind of segmenting it out, and not being like, I need to stop everything and be this amazing person like tomorrow, and that's the only way I can make a difference. And I think that's exactly right. Everyone needs to be starting on the journey and taking those small steps, and not focusing on the big leap from where they are now to where they want to be. And I think that's what's really powerful to me, and you get a lot of ownership over that. And I think that's what's awesome. People take ownership over their own journey, and there's lots of different ways to get to the same goal. And you take more ownership, you take more involvement, and you're more interested and excited to continue on that path. So I think that's where my advice would go.
Definitely make me want to go look at my own kitchen at the moment. Thanks, Dave. And with the last word, Sophia.
Yeah, so for myself, I would say advice for young people, I think it's important to question everything and, you know, like take the information you present with a grain of salt. There's this quote that I love, which is, they're not going to teach you how to start the revolution. They're not going to teach you how to overthrow something. They're not going to teach you how to dismantle racist, oppressive structures, right? Because that will topple the structure that they've built in order to oppress others and to, quite frankly, get what they want. So it's very important that you're looking at everything from a holistic lens. If someone is teaching you this one thing, you know, be respectful always, but do your own research, you know, look into, you know, the alternate perspective and think about, like, for example, if there's a material that you want to recycle, say you have this Gore-Tex jacket and you can't recycle it, or you can't take it to the Valley Village because they don't want to get rid of it, there's no recycling mechanism for this jacket. Well, think, why does this not exist? Why is that? Like, how come I can't be a part of the solution? Don't just accept all the answers that are given to you, but really be very curious. You know, like I said before, with innovation, that is definitely not something that it's going to come about if we just follow the status quo. And I'm a big believer of doing things. You know, I really believe in, you know, learning by doing and learning by failing and not being afraid to fail. I think, you know, I hate to be categorical, but in many circumstances, when I see change makers, I usually see three groups of people. I see critics, I see talkers, I see doers. And I think there's obviously different circumstances for everybody, but if you can be in the doer category, definitely try to be in that category. And perhaps you're a learner first and you can go into the category later. But I think this notion of collaborating with others, leading by example, learning from your own failures, and always, you know, questioning is definitely a great step in the right direction. And once you get into this world, once you start doing and questioning, you'll get invited to more things. You'll take ownership for your work. You'll feel excited because you feel like you are making a tangible impact. And I think once you really get into that route, it's almost really hard to escape that, and it's hard to come out of that because you realize that, you know, there is ownership and so much, you know, brilliance in youth-led communities. And we're really not the futures of tomorrow. We're the futures of today. We are here right now. I think we're all capable of accomplishing so many things. So don't let just classroom learnings and an answer someone told you hold you back. Do your own research, be your own leader, and carve your own path.
Well, I'm feeling very inspired by all of you. So I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me. This has been fantastic. It's a great conversation. So thank you. And let's stay connected and keep this conversation going. So we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Sweet. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks,
everyone. It
everyone.
was so great to meet you. I'm feeling so inspired.
Yeah.
Yeah, same.
Likewise.
Awesome.